This is Tuesday, November 8, 2016, in New York City. My name is Cindy Kelly, and I am here with Rachel Erlanger. Now, first thing you should do is say your name and then spell it.
All right, R-A-C-H-E-L, and Erlanger, E-R-L-A-N-G, as in Gertrude, E-R. But I wasn't married then, was I? I think maybe you want my maiden name.
Yeah, what was your maiden name?
My maiden name was Fenichel, F-E, that's F as in Frank, E-N-I-C-H-E-L.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. So I want to know something about your childhood. Can you tell us first when you were born and where?
I was born in 1923.
And where were you born?
I was born in New York City.
Who were your parents?
Well, my mother, Augusta Bloom, that was her maiden name, was born in New York. And she, when I was a little girl, she would tell me about, she had worked as a bookkeeper. And that was really very exalted for a little immigrant girl at that time. In other words, girls didn't have very good jobs. And then to be a bookkeeper for a high-class firm, well, that made her somebody a little more important. And of course, it gave her money.
That's fabulous. What country was she born in?
My mother was born here in the United States. My father was born in Poland, and he came to the United States. And at that time, it was considered disgraceful for an American Goyle, as my aunt said, like my mother, to marry a greenhorn like my father. But as I got to know my father, I decided he was smarter than a lot of the American men that I knew.
So what was your father's profession? What did he do for a living?
He never had a profession. He came here with the idea of doing something spectacular because he was a very good student in Poland. And he went, it's interesting, he went to a school which was really a Catholic-run school because Poland is a Catholic country. But when they found him, the nurses who ran this were so impressed by how smart he was that they accepted him for the school, and he got, I guess, as much education as he could hope to get right there. And he knew a lot of things which I, going to school here, didn't know.
So how old was he when he came over to this country?
I really don't know. I think he was still in his 20s.
In his 20s. So what was his job, or what were some of the jobs he had?
Well, when he came here, his teacher, he started off on the wrong foot, so to speak. His teachers in Poland thought he was very brilliant, and that when he came here, he should go to school. But his family, or rather not his family, but his father's family, felt that, you know, he should go out and get a job and make a lot of money. That was the big thing that you had to do in life. So he let them talk him into it, and that was really the tragedy of his life. Because if he had just stuck with what he wanted to do, it would have been so much better for him. But I'm just giving you what I think. life was very complicated then, as it was always, but it was a different kind of complication. He was an immigrant, and he came here. He got a better education in that Catholic school in Poland than he would have gotten here, but it didn't count for anything. I don't know if I'm making clear to you what happened.
Yes. So, what was his attitude when you were young? Did he want you to go to school?
Oh, yes, he believed in, and he had a very strong feeling. I mean, for a man from his background, it's miraculous, for women's rights. But in any case, he was very interested in women working and making something of themselves, which wasn't usual at that time. And I was sort of unusual because you had to know the setup then, that my parents were American born, because most people were not, quote, American born. They were immigrants who had come here. Does that give you some kind of a picture of the society?
Yes. So, tell me about your mother then.
Well, my mother was a tragic figure because my mother was born in the United States, and she was going to evening high school and studying, and she really didn't know what she wanted to do with it, but she wanted to do something. And how am I going to get this all in? Well, in any case, she was in a family where they encouraged her. And my father was really a unique person because he believed in women's liberation before there was any talk of women's liberation. And so he was very intrigued when he met this career lady, as he saw it, because most of the women then, had very menial jobs, and then they went back and got married, and, that was their life. But my mother had higher ideals, but she had a very tragic life, because my mother, when she was going to high school, met a medical student and fell in love with him. But anyhow, she met him when she was about, 18, 17. And she was going to evening high school where she was studying Shakespeare, which was her great love. And so she wasn't matriculated for anything. She was just taking courses in Shakespeare. But at that time, even that was very unusual. And then while she was living at, it was on the Lower East Side, there was a young medical student by the name of Mike who would visit her, and she fell in love with him. So that was the whole business. That was the thing that destroyed her life, because he stayed there, he used to visit her every day, and they were, sort of like boy and girl love affair. But in any case, she was madly in love with him, and innocent, because if she had stopped to think, she would realize that a medical student with no money cannot marry a girl like her, has to marry a girl whose parents will help him go through medical school and open an office and all of that. In any case, came the time when he had to go off to medical school. I mean, he was taking courses in a medical school around there, but now we had to go off to another medical school. And so he told her, or led her to believe, I don't know quite, that he would come back for her. And that was the tragedy of her life, because I guess she was in love with him, but it's also, you know, she would be marrying a doctor. Anyhow, that was the story of her life. Anyhow, there she was, and she was really unusual for a young girl in her circumstances. First place, she wasn't an immigrant. They had come, her father would come here, and they were very proud of that, because really at that time it was unusual to be a second generation American. I don't know how I can give you the atmosphere at that time and how people felt about things, because girls weren't expected to do anything great with their lives. And on the other hand, if she made, quote, a good marriage, that would be a great accomplishment. And if she married a doctor, well, God, that would really be the end all. Of course, he wasn't a doctor then, but he was studying to be a doctor. So that's the story, because he left, and she was convinced that he was going to come back for her. So she must save herself for Mike, which meant that she wasn't going to go out with any other boys, because she was going to be marrying Mike. And as my aunt, her sister, said, she had so many chances to get married, because that was really what every girl wanted to do in those days. But she turned them all down because she was waiting for Mike. Now, unfortunately, Mike obviously forgot about her as soon as he went away. Maybe not as soon, but soon after he went away, he had his medical profession. He had to work probably to keep him in medical school. I don't know. But she kept thinking that he was going to come back for her. And so she didn't want to get involved with any other man. And that's the tragedy of her life. And meanwhile, she was working as a bookkeeper. So she was highly successful, because at that time, most girls on the Lower East Side worked in factories. So to have become a bookkeeper, and then she was promoted to head bookkeeper. So she had more money than most girls. So there she was, and she realized that she had thrown away 10 years of her life, the best 10 years of her life, going after this good for nothing. And here she didn't have children, might not have children and everything. Well, then she became desperate to find a husband. Now, it was at that point that my father showed up. He was an immigrant from Poland, and he was very idealistic. He wasn't impractical, but he was idealistic. And he met him, my grandfather met him in the synagogue and brought him home. Of course, he took one look at my mother, and he was smitten. I don't think he realized that she was almost in her 30s or in her 30s by that, but that was the girl that he wanted. She was exactly the kind of American girl that he dreamt of. She was a career lady, she was a successful bookkeeper, she was good looking and she spoke good English. So he was utterly smitten with her. And of course, she wasn't the least bit interested in him. My father wasn't going to let her say no because he was fascinated by her. She was everything he wanted. She was American, she was educated, she was smart. So, and she at this point was desperate because she wanted children. So they got married. And she had a lot of trouble adjusting herself to all his, what she considered unreasonable demands, and he had to get used to her unreasonable demands. But they also, there was a lot of affection between them. She liked him, but there were things, you know, he was a foreigner, and there were a lot of things that they didn't get along on. He liked to keep the windows closed. She liked to keep the windows open. God knows what else. So anyhow, then I was born. I was their oldest child. And they were both ecstatic with me. So they were very happy. And then she had, but you know, he also wanted a boy. Every Jewish man wants a boy. So then she had a boy, and he had wanted to be a lawyer. He loved the law. But in any case, they got married, and they had a beautiful apartment on College Avenue, which was in the West Bronx, and was considered, you know, more Tony than the East Bronx. So that's where they were. And then they got along and they didn't get along, if you know what I mean. So they went on, and really my childhood was not too bad for a while. But then, you know, that was the Great Depression. And my father, first he had the store, and then the store went, so then he had to get a job. And so he got a job working for, I forgot what it was, some bakery. And you know, it was horrible for him because that's not what he expected in life, but that's what he had to do. And he was a very heroic man. He wouldn't leave his children. So that's the story of my life. So my father had to find a job now. He lost his job. What was he going to do? So he, as I put it when I wrote about it, he disappeared into the Depression looking for a job. But eventually, somewhere in here, we were sent to a foster parent. And my mother had to go to a mental hospital because she had gone completely off. So my uncle and my cousin, who were both bachelors and had no real understanding of these things, somebody had told them that she should go to Pilgrim State Hospital because it's a new hospital and it's going to have everything. Well, of course, I know if you've heard of Pilgrim State Hospital, but it was terrible. And my poor mother went to Pilgrim State Hospital, and she started to deteriorate. And then we were sent to a variety of foster mothers until my aunt said, I've seen those children in a home, and I don't want them in the home anymore. And so she said she would take care of us. But she wasn't very good. She didn't know how to take care of children. She wasn't as smart as my mother. But she was the heroine of the story. she took care of her. And then my mother got better, because, you know, it's not something, manic depression is something where you go down and then you go up again. So when she got better, she took us out of the home. I was in high school by the time. My mother was the one who found out that she went to school, and she said, my daughter is very bright. I don't want her to go to the local school. And my teacher said she should try to get me into Hunter High School. So I went to Hunter High School, and I was in the 1 class, which is, you know, the best class.
Okay.
Now, first place, when I was young, I wasn't the greatest looking person in the world by a long shot. And so Bernie, that's my husband, he had a friend, Louis Calico. Louis Calico was older than we were, and I used to walk to school with him, and it wasn't, you know, lovey-dovey. It was just, we were intellectuals, and we talked about all kinds of things. But his best friend was Bernard Erlanger. And when Bernard Erlanger asked him what Estelle Lewis, who was the school beauty and my best friend, looked like, he said, Ray is the one you want to look at now. So my husband said, you've got to be kidding. And he said, but in his back of his mind, he thought, maybe she is, you know, could it be possible that pain in the ass became beautiful? And meanwhile, I had become a hot communist. Those were the days. And so I was sitting on the Fifth Avenue bus, and we all made noise, you know, like typical teenagers make spectacles. So I was sitting on the Fifth Avenue bus with a copy of Daily Worker hidden in a copy of the Times. And I was reading, and Bernard Erlanger got on the bus. And I said, I know you. You're the one who stole the biology medal from me. And then we got to know. But Bernard Erlanger was flabbergasted by the change in my looks, because he remembered the cross-eyed, nasty little girl. And I really, in my teens, people thought I was beautiful. So, well, he wanted to go out with me. I treated him very badly because I was a teenager and a pain in the ass. But he was determined. He loved me. You know, we had such a crush on him. So eventually, he got married. And we had 3 children. And he went back to school. So did I. And I wanted to be a writer. And at that point, I sold quite a few articles to very well-known magazines. I had to support my family at that point. So I got a job. I had some science. So I got a job. And it turned out to be, I wasn't supposed to tell anybody what this job was about. And we weren't allowed to keep our badges on when we were outside of the place. Now you want the story of how I got to Kellex.
Yes, we need to know how you got to Kellex. Did you answer an ad?
Yeah, I had to support my family. And I guess I was unscrupulous in the fact that I lied like hell about my qualifications if I could get a job. So I didn't know what I told them at Kellex, but I told them some stuff and I got the job. And then there were all kinds of young people around, and it was fun. The name of the company that was doing this was Kellex, Kellex Company. And that Bernie, in the meanwhile, had gotten the job, and they sent him to Uravan, uranium, vanadium. And then he couldn't tell me about his job, and I wasn't supposed to tell him about my job. So that's where we were. And meanwhile, there was Charlie Benz, where I was working. And afterward, I thought, I bet Charlie Benz was suspicious of me. Maybe he was there, you know, to not have people, to find out if the people that were working there were really reliable and could work there. And he was suspicious of me. Because it wasn't hard to be suspicious of me. It had a big mouth, and I talked about being a hot communist and all kind. You know, when you're that age, not everybody, but you know, you can become a terrible show-off. I figured out, you know, because of what they were doing, because I thought they're trying to make U-235 from U-238. Because well, that I read about, because U-235 was the chemical that was used in the A-bomb. And how did you get from U-238 to U-235? Now, I can't remember all the details of this, but I know that I began to think that that's why we were there.
Now, did you write letters to Bernie talking about your job?
I wrote letters to Bernie talking about my job, and then I realized what they're trying to do is to get U-235 from U-238.
Did you keep the job to the end of the war?
No, I can't remember that, honestly. I know I left the job at a certain point, because we were also getting married. But when he was drafted and he went down to enlist, they told him to go someplace else. When he went in, they said to him, where do you want to be? And he said, the Navy. They said, you're in the Army. And then he went to Uravan, Colorado.
Talk about your husband. How did he get into the Manhattan Project? What did he do there?
Well, you know, he was totally interested in science, and he was also very smart. And so they had, and I think one of his professors, they had asked for references, you know, and they told him that he was a very brilliant student. And so whatever it was, suddenly they were sending him. First he went to Uravan. And then I was not stupid, because I had enough chemistry, and I realized Uravan must be uranium, vanadium. So that's what they're working on. But he wasn't allowed to talk about it to anybody. They did things in the lab, testing. I don't know exactly what they did. Maybe he wasn't supposed to tell me. And you know, well, anyhow, he worked in Uravan, and then from Uravan, they sent him to Los Alamos. And I never saw him at Los Alamos. I didn't see him at Uravan either, but I met friends of his, Cooper, who became his friend all the time.
What else should we talk about?
Well, he was doing, he went to Los Alamos and he fell in love with, quote, Oppie, J. Robert Oppenheimer. And he thought he was the most marvelous scientist and the most brilliant man that he had ever met. which he really was, you know. But he was also young, you know. And the whole place was young, and he was having a marvelous time there.
Is there anything you'd like to say about, how you felt about working on the atomic bomb?
Well, I was young and dumb, and I was excited. And once I figured out that what we were working on, I was more excited than before. But I knew I wasn't supposed to talk about it, so I didn't talk about it.
There's so much. It's really, that is great. You did a great job. You really had a fascinating life. I think a lot of people will be able to relate to your stories. And I think that there are many pieces of what you said about your job. Many other people felt the same way, that they didn't know why they got hired, and they did what they were told, and
Well, it was the war. We knew
war.
we were doing something for the war effort, and that made you feel important. Then I figured out what we were doing, and that made me feel more important. But then when Bernie spoke to me, I realized, he was in a much higher level position than I was. And so that was it.
So was he proud of his service on the Manhattan Project also?
He was fascinated. He was fascinated by Oppie. But Bernie just talked about him all the time. He was older than Bernie, but not that much older. And Bernie said he was so brilliant and so unassuming, and he just thought he was the end of the world. And then they started saying he was a communist, but there was a man that worked on it with him who was older, and he told them, you're crazy. He's not a communist, leave him alone. I'm ashamed to say that we were very excited that we had worked on it. And it's only afterward that I thought, what a terrible thing this is. And, it's like, we used to read things in science, in stories and everything, where you come to something that is so dangerous that you shouldn't be getting involved with it. And that's the way I felt about this. Why the hell did we get involved with all this? But I didn't feel that way at the time. At the time, I was very excited. I felt very important to be a part of this.
Bernie saw the test in the desert, the Trinity test.
I wasn't there. Bernie was there. He just told me about it, and I was all excited. I must say that I didn't think of all the horrible parts of all of this. I just liked the idea that I was involved with. I was very young, and of course the fact that he was involved with it too made it sort of romantic, We're both on the same thing. But Daddy had a much more important part in it than I did, but his wasn't that important either, compared, say, to Oppie. But what I remember most is all of them thought Oppie was the most wonderful person.